Chapter 1: Mother and Child. On that day, the governing body of the Galaxy Federation was surrounded in an atmosphere tenser than it had ever been before. It was because of the news that Mikomo Kuramitsu, the most elder member of the whole Kuramitsu family, was in critical condition. Originally, the Galactic Federation was established to combine the wisdom of the Royal Academy of Jurai with the strength of the second most powerful country, Senua, via Mikomo Kuramitsu's private army. This established the supporting foundation of the Galactic Federation and birthed two child organizations, the Galaxy Police and the Galaxy Academy. Having two organizations made a huge difference. The Royal Academy was owned by the nation of Jurai, but the most elder Kuramitsu, Mikomo Kuramitsu, was the sovereign of the second largest nation. Because the private military was his alone, his death would be a great event that had the potential to alter the power structure of the Galaxy Police completely. But getting to the point, the eldest Kuramitsu, Mikomo, was currently under heavy criticism over the news of his condition. During the memorial at Mikomo's estate, in the antechamber of his home, the Kuramitsu family and two other groups were seated. The second head member of the Senua Elder Men's Association and the second head of the Senua Elder Women's Associations were gathered. The reason why the second head members were present was that their presidents were Mikomo and Mikami respectively. Therefore, each of the co-chairs were here to represent their organizations. Why has our fatherly master invited all of us here if he is not yet ready to hand down his verdict? Tama Kuramitsu, who sat in the president of the Senua Elder Men's Association seat, raised his voice in frustration, breaking the long silence. Usually, such acts of frustration and loud outbursts in such a sacred place wouldn't be tolerated, but neither Minami nor Mikami, nor any other family member of the Kuramitsu family had been told anything. There were only those who were saddened for the coming loss of their father, and those who felt the same doubts that were the cause for Tama's frustration. There were several things complicating the situation this time, one of which was that Mikomo was still the head of the family. Originally, the main candidate should have already been nominated, but someone worthy to take Mikomo's place had not appeared because none could surpass his greatness. And due to Mikomo's unusually long life, no one publicly wanted the appearance of assuming the nomination until he was finally deceased. So naturally, the result was a last-minute nomination. Of course, there were similar situations in the past. Upon receiving the news of the current head of the family's serious condition, their descendants convened together in his final moments to bear witness to the death of the head of the family. Then their verdict was passed down and one person waiting in the room was bequeathed the title. If the person who was left the title was still young, then a candidate was left an adult proxy in the will. But at this time, everyone in the antechamber was continuing to wait for a will to be passed down. It seemed like it was taking forever to name a successor during what was an emergency situation. It was natural and justified that some of them were getting angry. Tama was especially frustrated because he was confident that he was going to be called first, and he was waiting for that ecstatic moment. And if no word was received and Mikomo collapsed, then the firstborn would automatically inherit the position. If that happened, there was the possibility of a civil war breaking out. This is bullshit. Tama's frustration had reached its limit. Even though he was the vice chairman of the Senua Elder Men's Committee, Tama was not a full Senuan descendant. This was the second reason that Tama was confident in his estimation of the possibility of him being nominated by Mikomo to be the next head of the family. The first reason was, simply put, Mikomo Kuramitsu's controversial ideology. Although Tama was a humanoid, the appearance of his white skin and green eyes made it obvious that he was mixed with the DNA of humanoid from a different star system. He was also in the direct line of succession to the Kuramitsu line, but for a long time he was a long way from the top. However, thanks to Mikomo's achievements of becoming the driving force in establishing the GP and the Galactic Federation, Mikomo had much more influence than the actual owner of Senua within the Galactic Federation. Particularly in the GP, which was one of the two major organizations supporting the Galactic Federation, Mikomo's private army was the mother body, so even for the head of Senua, it was virtually impossible to impose their will without going through Mikomo's approval first. As the number of members to the Galactic Federation increased to counter the pirates, and its scale started to expand rapidly, Senoa's voice within the Galactic Federation gradually became smaller. Jurai was also lagging behind. Contrarily though, Mikumo, who was the Secretary General of the Galactic Federation, gained an even bigger voice. The Senoa Elder Men's Committee and the Senoa Elder Women's Committee, in response to the unexpected power reversal, felt they were in crisis. So, they approached the head of the Kuramitsu family at the time, and Mikumo when he finally received the nomination. Because of this, Mikumo emphasized the ability of others, and not the bloodline, and he began to respect the opinions of the Elder Men's Association and the Elder Women's Association. Although Mikumo emphasized ability, the direct line of succession of the Kuramitsu family was still the best for nomination. But because this was about picking Mikumo's successor in particular, and not someone else's, it was better for the successor to have as many possible elements of both to convince everyone. And both elders' associations were of the same opinion. The birth of Mikami showed signs of breaking down the long-lasting deadlock. She was the firstborn of her family and she was expected to take the position from a young age. She was initially thought of as being the right person for the position by Mikumo as well as the elders' associations, but in Mikami's youth, she demonstrated a tremendous amount of foolishness and showed that she was willing to start fights regardless of her opponent, and then finally Jurai took an extremely aggressive position against her. As such, it became clear that naming Mikami head of the family wouldn't proceed. They decided to wait and keep watch as she grew into her adulthood to see if she would change her character. But Mikumo's lifetime wouldn't last forever. As his age advanced, Mikumo's participation in politics decreased due to old age. That began to cause the reversal of the power between Mikumo and the heads of the Senoan state. Of course, there were many people who were interested in the well-being of the Mikumo administration, but many people were dissatisfied with the feeling of impedance against matters that were deadlocked for so long. So, eventually it became the Elders Association's opinion that Mikami's younger brother Minami should be positioned as the next family leader. Mikami was obviously superior to even Mikumo as a family head. Minami was also prominent in terms of talent, and moreover, Minami was straightforward and easy to control and was thought to be a convenient choice by the Elders Association. Mikumo, who ultimately was to make the decision, didn't dispute that opinion. It became a decisive matter. Minami became the main contender for the candidacy for a while. But Minami had caused a scandal that saw him demoted to the position of head of ship maintenance of the GP, and it created a big shadow on the appointment of him as the successor. The next candidate was the child of Minami, but Mitoto was personally unsuitable for the position and her husband Nikita was Minami's adopted son-in-law. His granddaughter Mihoshi suffered from a mental disorder caused by past trauma and her treatment was ongoing, therefore, she couldn't be a candidate. Her brother Masao was still too young, and because Mikami had no children, there was no one else who could be nominated as the head of the Kuramitsu family at that time. Of course, Mikami or Minami will ultimately be the head of family, but in the meantime I am the vice chair of the Elder Men's Association. They should have already named me as their proxy. Tama had also served as the head of the GP in the past, and still maintained heavy responsibilities within the operations of the GP, and since he had also been acting as Mikumo's representative in the council, it was natural for him to think that. But nevertheless, click-clack-click. At that moment, the sound of someone walking reverberated from a corridor which should have been silent. The sounds of the footsteps were easily discernible as being too composed and elegant to be that of one of Mikumo's servants. Who is that? All the people in the room became nervous and looked confused as soon as they heard the footsteps. It was as if the footsteps were filled with the dignity of the lord of that house. Was Mikumo making an appearance? It confused everyone. But the footsteps were coming from a corridor in the direction opposite to the room where Mikumo was. Everyone in between was the elite of Senoa, but their combined strength did not save them from the confusion caused by these footsteps. Who is that? He was convinced that the footsteps were not Mikumo's, but still Tama was embarrassed to even have to ask this question. He had a bad feeling that it was someone coming to tell everyone that no decision would ever be made. But of course, no such thing was happening. That was just a figment of his imagination. Tama thought that at least the confusion would settle if the person behind the footsteps appeared and identified themselves. But that wasn't the case. Boom. The doors opened, Tama's eyes and mouth opened wide, and he was stunned when he saw the figure of the person who was standing in the doorway. Of course, the same was true for the other members of the Kuromitsu family. Washa-chan. Mihoshi, who was half in tears, had a stupefied expression on her face as she tilted her head. There was Hakubi Washu standing in the back of the dark corridor, upon her adult figure with her splendid red hair that looked like the fire in the fireplace had jumped out of the fireplace and onto her head. Welcome, Washa-sama. Mikami had stood up near the door when she heard footsteps and was waiting for Washu. And she greeted her as if she was the lord of this house. What? No way. Why? The meaning of that word by Tama is complicated. Why are you alive? Why have you revealed it just now? Why did you come here? Rumors of Washu's survival had always been whispered. However, it had been 5,000 years since she went missing. Her existence was only a legend, and in fact there were very few whose legacies had survived as long. Of course, Tama was a part of a generation that had never seen Washu. The rumor had an implied level of fear of Washu directly attached to it. The rumor that she was alive was on the same level as that of Bigfoot, vampires, and the Chupacabra. It was trash tabloid-level idle gossip. Although he had not actually met her, enormous amounts of video material on Washu was still available, and there was no doubt that the person in front of him was Washu, at least in appearance. Of course, appearance was proof of nothing, in a world where technologies existed that could change as much as anything were commonplace. But a woman who could unnerve Tama with just her footsteps alone couldn't be just anyone, much less a woman who, with only her eyes, could impart such a tremendous and overwhelming presence. When he noticed Washu's presence, Tama understood in an instant how it was that there were people who worshipped and feared Washu and nothing but Washu. But what was important was why Washu had shown up in this place at this time. Why now? After all, Washu was a person who was on Jurai's side during the time of the Imperial Academy, which was when they were hostile towards Senua. As expected, in the present day and age, the hostile relationship between Jurai and Senua had diminished, and among those of Mitoto's generation, those sentiments towards Jurai had almost completely disappeared. However, here she was now, in the middle of Senua, where Makumo was dying. He couldn't figure out what condolences she would have to give, or how she had gotten into a place where few people were allowed. But regardless, it was natural that anyone would be perplexed if there was a legendary philosopher who had been missing for 5,000 years in front of them. How unpleasant. Who let that woman in here? Tama, who was finally recovering from his shocked state, remembered something important. That was the fact that this place was the most important place in Senua. Naturally, it had the highest level of security, and even government officials were unable to trespass into this place. Ms. Mikami, you said you were waiting for something. Who was it? Mikami knew something he didn't, and that frustrated Tama. He stared at Mikami. Tama found Mikami's actions very disrespectful, and this only strengthened his confidence in receiving the position, but the situation began to move beyond what he expected. A door to Makumo's private room opened. It flooded the room with light. It was like the gate of Celestial Rock Cave. A woman who was Makumo's secretary and nurse came out like Amaterasu and said, "Hurry up, Washu Hakubi. Come now, please come in." Makumo, who had been ailing for a long time, rarely attended official business, and so the communication of his intentions came through his nurse. In other words, her word was Makumo's intention, and he was calling for Washu. What? Wait a moment. Why is this woman here and who is she? You petulant child, please wait here quietly, this will be over soon. What? Tama, who tried to run up to the nurse, but was frozen in place by a gaze from Washu. Washu bowed to those in the waiting room and went with the nurse. The door closed. What? What is the meaning of this, Mikami? Tama, freed from the intimidating pressure when the door closed, glared at Mikami. Mikami delivered an answer with a kick so hard it could have thrown open the giant doors of the room all by itself. Of course, the other Koromitsus also wanted to know and were just as in shock. Tama Dano, don't you know that everyone, even your honorable father, is descended from both a father and a mother? How can this be? Is this real? Is it even possible? Washu's green eyes overlapped with that of Makumo's in everyone's head. Miss Washu Hakubi is our honorable father Makumo's mother. What? Tama, who understood the situation, became silent. This is a terrible scandal. It would make quite a fuss if it was known to the outside that the founder of the GP was the son of Washu Hakubi. It would seem as if the GP was under the control of the academy. Tama wasn't the only one who thought this. We must prevent this fact from leaking to the outside, Tama said with his eyes vacant. He headed to a nearby sofa and sat down exhausted. There was one thing Tama boasted about. That was that he had the same green eyes as Makumo. Originally, the Koremitsu clan was characterized by their blue eyes. Even if they were married to non-family members, it was handed down with a high probability. Even Makumo's descendants rarely had green eyes, so Tama boasted about it. But now that he knew they came from Washu Hakubi, his self-image was severely confused. Mikami. This situation cannot be known to outsiders. Well, just remember, if you don't start anything, then there's no reason for her to start anything. I understand. The easiest way around the situation was to make Washu disappear. But to do that to someone like her was impossible. She was like a walking fortress. Her collective body of works and technology was powerful enough to destroy even planetary-scale ships. And the fact that Washu was Makumo's mother would put a damper on anyone planning to do such a thing. But that depends on what she chooses to do. Don't you agree? War against Washu would hinge on whether or not she agreed to their terms. If Washu breaks our conditions, will the rest of the Koremitsu also cooperate with me? Of course they will, Mikami said. Tama crossed his arms and sunk deeper into the sofa. Suddenly the bell on the roof of Makumo's house began to ring. Washu entered the room about 30 minutes later. It was a sign of Makumo's death. Oh! No one had gotten to see him beforehand but her, and there was a deep sorrow that had enveloped the room. Tama gave a silent and short prayer, but he quickly stared at the door. He was concerned about the progress of the will. The news of Makumo's death would soon be transmitted throughout the Galactic Federation as well as Senua, and many funeral ceremonies would be held. As Tama's patience was about to reach its limit, the door of Makumo's room opened heavily and Washu and the nurse came out. Tama and Mikami got up quickly and greeted them with a bow. Well then, I shall convey to you the last will and testament of Makumo Koremitsu, Washu said as everyone listened intently. The next heir to be the head of household, the next head of the Koremitsu family, is Minami Koremitsu. Oh! There were two people who gasped, Minami and Tama, and for totally different reasons. Minami was surprised at being nominated. Tama was disappointed. The personnel of the Elder Women's Association will continue in its current state. The men's will vacate the position of the president. What? Tama hadn't expected this. The chairman of the Elder Men's Association will be vacant, and we will continue to operate with Koremitsu Mikami and Koremitsu Tama as the secondary seats. The next president will be appointed when it's judged that the right time has come. This has the Elders Women's Association and Washu Hakubi's approval, and finally, Makumo's body will be managed by Washu Hakubi. What? At that moment, Tama's head nearly exploded. The corpse management should have been handled by the Men's Council. The next head should also have served as head of the council. But no one was to serve, and those who handled the body held substantial rule over Senua while they did, which was an important factor in choosing the president. It's over. Who objects? Everyone was silent in Washu's line of sight. There seems to be no objection, so we leave both Koremitsu Mikami and Koremitsu Tama to fulfill their obligations. At Washu's words, they all bowed and left the room to prepare for the funeral. Minami, who was nominated for the next term, was waiting to meet with the heads of state. Various confusion and doubt remained, but the problem of corpse management for Makumo was solved. Well, do you have something you want to ask? Washu said once the bell on Makumo's house stopped ringing. The bell to convey the news of the results was heard faintly in the distance. There is no mistake in the content of the will? Tama asked, not to Washu directly, but to the nurse who was behind her. The nurse was in a sense, was a substitute for Makumo. I am okay with us following the will, but it will cause trouble if we announce to the public that you are the mother of the fatherly master. I'm tired of wearing this motherly face that I had to put on this morning, but I'm relieved since I was able to see him for one last parting. I will not participate in the funeral. In spite of Tama's rude attitude, Washu answered while smiling. Good. But well, I must ask that you do not visit his grave until it's settled down. Oh, I will be sure to do that. Washu-sama, are you okay with that? Mikami asked. I was missing for 5,000 years. If I came, it would make a big fuss and the funeral would be ruined. Besides, I want to choose the right time to reveal my survival. Ahuhu, besides, if I showed up at a funeral unannounced, there would be many old people there who might still remember me. I don't want it to turn into a mass funeral when they all die from shock. I understand, Mikami said, laughing. But usually the funeral arrangements are left to the men's association. Who will you have handle it now that there's no head to carry it out? The president's seat is vacant, and the second row is horizontal, so I will designate his nurse as his administrator. Are you joking? Leaving such a woman in charge is a joke. How can you be okay with this, Mikami? As a mother, I will not put up with my son's body being made a piece of crappy politics, do you understand? Washu's facial expression changed completely. Oh! Tama froze up like he was just bathed in ice water. Washu's glare was so intimidating it could have caused his heart to stop. He was lucky he didn't go incontinent. Yes, ma'am. I will not go against the last will of Mikumo. Tama, who was in a state of being overwhelmed by Washu's intimidation, was barely able to leave the place after somehow bowing down. The mind is a gentle thing. You should be gentler with your words, Mikami said with a sigh after Tama left. I will try, but that one needed to be disciplined. I'm surprised you are still so composed after all that. Oh, really? I'll tell you why later. Washu stepped up towards the exit while waving. She gave the nurse a little glance and yawned. Well, I best be going before things get noisy around here. Please contact me if there is something that comes up. She bowed deeply to the nurse and Mikami and then turned and walked away the same way she came in, with her footsteps echoing throughout the house. Damn it. Damn it. Tama came back to the captain of the Senoan flagship, Senoa, which bore the planet's name. He slammed his fist against the desk. Nikita was worried. I have never been so humiliated before in my life. Sooner or later they had to give instructions and news of his father Mikumo's death to various parts of the military, but until then Nikita waited silently for Tama to settle down.